Welcome to Grafted, Jewish Roots of Christianity, and I'm your host, Stephanie Pavlantos. Thank you for joining me today. And my guest has been on a couple of times before, and I've even had him on our show on Friday evening, our live show with Lauren Cruz and I called Living Waters, Falling Deeper in Love with God's Word. So he's been a guest multiple times, and his name is Andrew Roth. Thank you, Andrew, for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So I'm going to link the different shows that we've done together so people can go back and watch those. But for those of you who haven't heard of him, let me give you a little bit of his bio and then I'll let him explain more. So Andrew is from One Faith, One People Ministries.com. That's his website. That is where he teaches. That's where he has resources and everything. That's his site. He is a Torah teacher, a Bible translator. He specializes in Hebrew and Aramaic, and he is an author. He has multiple books out, and he has a recent one that just came out. Now, this is going to be airing a little bit later than we're recording today, but this book is very recent in September. And it is called The Apostolic Writings. And this is a translation from Aramaic to English of the divinely inspired words of the Messiah and his apostles. It's a big book. It's the whole New Testament, right? And it's a really, really good resource. So thank you, Andrew. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your new book?
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. So this is my story, basically. I am of Jewish extraction on both sides of my family tree. I come from a family of rabbis and cantors. So a lot of what I do as a linguist is sort of in my blood. And I came to faith in Yeshua HaMashiach when I was in college. And from that point, I was fascinated to try to figure out how I could draw closer to him. But I had a bit of a crisis because certain things that were in the Greek text, which is all that I knew at that particular point, had certain challenges in it, right? And all these years later, I think it's the way it was taught more than the way it actually read.
Right.
But the way it was taught, you had all these different problems. Like you have Simon the leper having a dinner party where Jews attend and no one complains. And well, that's not possible. Lepers have to be in a leper colony. And the idea that Jews would go to a leper party and nobody raises an issue,
right?
It didn't make sense until I went into the Aramaic, and the Aramaic told me that the word for leper is identically spelled and almost identically sounding like the word for jar maker. And Yeshua was given a jar, right? So it kind of made more sense that he was in the house of Simon the potter or Simon the jar maker, and there Yeshua got an expensive jar of alabaster perfume. That told me that the Aramaic, at least in that reading, had to precede the Greek that got the double meaning wrong. And that was kind of a big deal. There were other things, like I'll give you one more quick example, that Matthew says in his first chapter that there are 42 generations of the Messiah from Abraham to him. He says it'd be 14, 14, and 14. Well, I got a surprise for you guys. If you count that last set, there's only 13 names, right? And the reason is that there are two Josephs involved that got confused as one Joseph. The Joseph in Matthew 1, verse 16, to make an extremely long story short, is not Mary's husband. It's her adopted father. A Levirate marriage happened, and that's a whole other story. And then the Joseph in 1, verse 19, there's a word that only means husband. So a general male term that sometimes means husband was confused for husband in 1, verse 16. And all of a sudden, you have 14, 14, and 14 perfect. And so these are fairly important findings that I look at my job as helping the Greek. The Aramaic is protecting the Greek from charges of inaccuracy. And not just in this case, but I found 500 issues.
Wow.
Yeah. And after 500, I stopped counting, but I found others after that. So my job has been to defend the Bible. My job as a translator has been to say, no, your Greek text is fine. It's just being taught wrongly. But if you want to understand how the problems crept in, you need the Aramaic to come alongside, because it is just as much of an ancient witness as the Greek is. So when some folks think I'm bashing the Greek, I'm actually trying to prop it back up and put it on a firm foundation. Yeah. So that's one thing. 2008 rolls around, and after 20 plus years of research, I put out my first translation called the Aramaic English New Testament. And I had people writing me from all over the world saying the Aramaic had a clarity and a force to it that they had never encountered in reading their regular translations. These are their words, not mine. There were people in prison who turned their lives around because the Aramaic spoke to them in a way that their traditional translations didn't. All sorts of miracle stories associated with speaking this text over people. So I'm like overwhelmed by the response and everything. But what ended up happening was the publisher and I at Natsari Press, we had a bit of a falling out. It was over unethical things. I'll just leave it at that. And I knew I had to start over. And after I made the decision to pull the plug on the original text, I was able to get much more ancient manuscripts, like 4th century instead of 10th century. Okay. And that was through my friend Ewan MacLeod, who had access to the British Library manuscripts, which are the most ancient, the most reliable manuscripts of the Aramaic New Testament on earth. When I got those manuscripts, I found there were a whole bunch of places that I could improve the translation, because now I'm not going from a summary. I'm not going from a critical text where they stitch different readings from different manuscripts together. I'm going to the source. And my mind was blown at how, not that what I did was before wasn't good, it was, but that it became so much better. But I had to start from scratch. That was the price that I had to pay. And last 2 years, my wife Jay got in on this with me as my English editor. So she will say, well, is it red or is it crimson? Is it scarlet? Looking, knowing I got the color right, but what made best sense in context. And so we would have countless hours of discussions, sometimes till 5:30 in the morning, going over this text. I'm translating it in Aramaic, and then I'll see what another translator did, and I'll say, oh, that's wrong. No, I think it's more like this. And she'll say, why? And so we really took our time to make this text, the apostolic writings.
That's good. And I know lots of people. I mean, I went through a traditional publisher for my books, but I just didn't feel like when I first started, now I know people who are great editors, who are great artists, and all of that I probably could reach out to now if I wanted to write a new book. Right now, my life's been too busy to write, but I like your cover because it's very simple. I like the scroll and the vine. I think it's just very simple and to the point. Like it's not bogged down with a lot of stuff on the cover of it. And I like it. I like the book a lot. And again, it's a big book. If you're watching this, it's a large book because it is a whole New Testament.
And it's in color.
And you have, it's red letter.
It's also blue letter.
Oh, I see that. I just came across that.
See that?
I haven't had to read it. But I actually have recommended it to Lauren Cruz, who you met. And she said she's already read Galatians in here. She read the whole book of Galatians.
She's gotten that far.
Yeah, well, she skipped over and went to Galatians.
Okay, I was going to say that.
Yeah, no, she hasn't gotten that far, but she liked that all your notes were there right on the same page, and that you just had, like a regular New Testament or regular leather Bibles, you have some of the notes there, and she was basically saying, oh yeah, make sure you look at the notes. And then you do a summary and a conclusion as well, like at the end of Luke, and then you have like questions. So about, it looks like, or are they just points? Let me see.
I'm phrasing certain parts of Luke in a question, because finding his identity outside of the Gospels was a real historical challenge. And I came to a conclusion that I'm pretty sure is not commonly known, that he was, for example, if I'm right, and I'm not saying I can prove it beyond all doubt, but just my opinion, if I'm right, his brother was an emperor of Rome. His father was the governor of Syria. And coming from that type of political connection explains why he was able to convert Theophilus, whom I have identified as a sitting high priest that isn't, Josephus mentions, right? And Theophilus, in turn, was put in his position by Luke's father. And so this explains how Luke is able to, bear witness to Theophilus. It also explains how...
Because he's a Jewish man,
Yeah. The other thing is, you notice how Paul gets arrested, but Luke doesn't? And Luke is always with Paul?
Yes.
You know why? Because he's from the royal family. All he's got to do is flash a ring, and you have a nice day, sir. But we're taking him.
Yeah.
So it fills in a lot of these gaps.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. So that's why that's just one example of a biographical summary. Granted, one of the more dramatic ones, but that's why I step through the reader and say, I ask this question, and then I ask another question, and give my best attempt at an answer.
Yeah, number 2 here on 152 says when Luke was in his early 20s, he was already a seasoned military commander.
Yep.
That's interesting. Yeah. And Luke would have likely been present when his father appointed Theophilus to become the high priest. So, yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, because I have heard that he was, he has a Greek name, but that he may have been a Hellenistic Jew is what I've actually heard.
But you see, we found Theophilus' tomb.
Yeah, but
we found it at Theophilus Cohen Gadol, Theophilus the high priest. So.
Okay, yeah, and I did hear that he was a high priest.
Yeah.
So I did hear that he was writing these letters to a high priest.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah. So what else have you found? We've talked about other things on other podcasts, but obviously you probably found more in researching this book.
Well, one of the things that's really important, I'm going to go to Acts chapter 9. Okay. Now I'm going in the blue book. The pages are numbered slightly differently. But what you can do, this is starting 9 verse 10, right? So what you'll notice is an interplay of blue and red. Okay.
Yes.
See, in Aramaic, there is no confusion about which Lord is Lord, but there is in the Greek. In the Greek, kurios can refer to the Father, can refer to Messiah, can refer to a king, or a local leader. Any Lord is Lord. A master.
Yeah, a master Lord.
But in Aramaic, if it's about Yeshua, it's going to be Mari, my master, or Maran, our master. And if it's about the Father, it's Marya. So just knowing there are different terms of lordship for Father and Son clears up 655 lines of text. Yes, I counted. I had nothing better to do that day. And so I'm like, knowing this is crucial in this part of Acts, because in this part of Acts, Yeshua and Yahweh take turns talking to Ananias or Hananiah, as is his Aramaic name. And so you can see this very clearly that, for example, he says, our master, which means Yeshua, said, and this is in red, arise, go to the street that is called Straight, and inquire at the house of Judah for Saul, who is from the city of Tarsus, right? And it goes on another couple of verses, right? But then you get to verse 15, and all of a sudden, in verse 15, it's not our master Yeshua, it's Maryah, it's Father Yahweh talking.
Wow.
And saying, arise and go, because he is a vessel to me, chosen to carry my name. Now that makes more sense. He's not chosen to carry Yeshua's name. He's chosen to carry the name of God, the Father.
Right.
So knowing which Lord is Lord, you weave in and out of this situation in Acts chapter 9, and you know that Yeshua speaks, then Father Yah speaks, and then Yeshua speaks.
Wow.
You would not be able to get that in any other translation, because everyone else is saying kurios for everybody. So that's just one example. And also it looks cool. I would always joke with people.
Great example. I mean, this is pretty cool, I think. Wow. Yeah.
You know, so you see the red and you see the white and the blue. So this is the most patriotic Bible you will ever own, because it's all red, white, and blue except for the ink. So
yeah. And yeah, wow. Okay, so here I just turned because I was looking for more blue. So Acts chapter 15, which, so it says, and this was the whole assembly. This was the Jerusalem council, right? In Acts 15. Yeah. So it says, and after they became quiet, it says Jacob, but that's James, right? What we think of James.
You call him James, but it's actually Yaakov, which is Jacob.
Right, Jacob.
Yeah.
And men, our brothers, listen to me. Shimon or Simon narrated to you how Elohim began to choose from the Gentiles a people for his name. And to this end, the words of the prophet are fulfilled as is written. And this is in blue. So this is Yah, Father Yah. Right. After these things, I will return and raise up the tabernacle of David, that which has fallen, and I will rebuild the thing that has fallen off of it, and I will raise it up, so that the remnant of men who seek Maryah and all Gentiles, those who my name is called over, says Maryah, who did these things. So,
right.
Yeah.
And then just in case the blue isn't clear, that's the first covenant, there's a footnote and it'll say Amos 5:11 through 12. So you get to see it through a variety of mechanisms how the Old Testament is all over the New Testament coming out of Yeshua's mouth. I love those examples, because you start with red because the Savior is speaking, and all of a sudden in mid-sentence we switch to blue because he's quoting, from First Covenant, and understanding that Yeshua is the Word made flesh, literally. The Torah is him. And so you can see how he goes back and forth.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
that's what I love.
Was that a little heavy?
No, you made me think of something so good, because you just like sparked something. So when we were talking before I started the recording, we were talking about Acts 7.
Right.
And in my ESV, I have it like, I have to find the verse. So like 38 and 37. So in yours it's blue, and in mine, of course, in my ESV, it's of course not, but it says in Acts 7, starting in 37, this is Moshe who said to the sons of Israel, I'm not very good at the Hebrew, so just bear with me. Maryah, Elohim will raise up for you a prophet like from your brothers. Listen to him. So he's quoting Deuteronomy here. This is Stephen.
18:15. Yep.
Yes. Yep. And Jesus said these same words in the book of John.
That's right.
if you believe what Moses said, then you'll believe in me.
545 to 47. If you believe Moses, you would believe in me because he wrote about me. But if you will not believe the writings of that man, how will you believe my words? It's like, boom, mic drop, when he says that.
Yes, exactly. But here it goes on in 30. So this is one of the things we were talking about, but there's a second point in here. So in 38, this is he who was in the assembly or the congregation, which in Greek is ecclesia, in the wilderness with the messenger who spoke with him and our forefathers on Mount of Sinai. And this is the one who received the living words. And in the ESV says oracles. And when I looked up oracles, it basically said logos and words. And that's Torah. Right? So we have the living Torah, so to speak, was given on Mount Sinai. And who is Yeshua, but those same living words.
Living words. Yeah. Or what James will describe. Yeah. Or what James will describe as the Torah of perfect freedom. Yeah. Which is another way of talking about Torah without people messing with it. The real message on Mount Sinai to Moshe and to all of humanity, not Israel alone, that becomes flesh as Yeshua to guide us all back to the truth of the Father. So
it's so cool. It's so cool. And I love this because there's so many connections that we miss because they might translate it as oracles instead of Torah.
And you know what the problem with oracle is? I mean, the most famous pagan pilgrimage site in the ancient world, the Oracle of Delphi, where this woman was basically stoned on natural gas coming from the crevice of and she's mumbling, like this. And then the so-called priest will say, she says you'll be successful in war. That'll be 500 drachmas, please.
Wow.
And so because 95% of the people who spoke Greek were pagan, because 95% of the world was pagan. I mean, there's some of that baggage that comes in, with the Greek terminology. And so they're going to say oracles because logos is a spoken. There's this big discussion about is it a spoken word or is it a written word or is it a spoken word that becomes a written word? And some will say the word rima is more about a spoken word and logos is more about a written word, but nobody really knows. But when it comes out as oracle, it shows the pagan influence on the text that comes out into English that we base our salvation on. Because I don't want any of us to go to the Oracle of Delphi. I mean, that would be ridiculous.
Right. And I think it's in the book of Hebrews too. They mention oracle.
Right.
So it's
and in Romans 3
a couple times.
3 verse 1. What advantage? I'll do King James. What advantage hath the Jew in every wise because they have been entrusted with the what? With the oracles of Elohim. Now contrast this, as you probably know, Hebrew would say davar, right? That's the generic Hebrew word for word. But Aramaic uses a term called miltha. And miltha, for example, John 1:1, in the beginning there was the miltha. So you could say word, in the beginning there was the word, but you could also say in the beginning there was the manifestation, the emanation, the vibration, the frequency, and about 10 other things. They would all be equally valid. And so there's a lot more depth here because it's speaking to the incarnation itself of Yeshua from the word in a very direct, intimate way that Logos doesn't really do that. And at least in my opinion, it doesn't do that.
Right.
So, and this is because, of course, this is the language of Yeshua himself. The languages of the Aramaic is the language of the country, Acts 1:19. And it is the language of all the disciples, all the apostles, and even Luke. My research has determined that even Luke converted to Judaism. So they're all Jewish by one way or another. And they are all speaking in Jewish languages to the Jewish people about wait for it, a Jewish Messiah.
Mm.
When you pull everything out from that context and Greekify it or Latinize it and make it something more Western friendly, you kind of you pulled it from the original vessel, and there's bound to be problems, so people go, well, so I have to kind of meet the text where it is. Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
As opposed to expecting it to meet you where you are.
Exactly.
So,
And you bring up a great point, because when Jesus, Yeshua, and Paul talk about food, they're talking about what God calls food and not the pepperoni pizza in our mind.
Exactly. Yeah, if it's unkosher, it's not food.
Right.
It may be flesh, but it's not food.
It might be edible, but it's not food.
And even the Greek does a really good job on that. That when they talk about nothing, a karthos, unclean, has passed my lips, with Peter in Acts 10, when he said, rise, kill, and eat, because the curtain of unkosher stuff comes in front of him. He's actually talking about things that he's actually saying, according to the Greek, that nothing that has been improperly slaughtered has crossed my lips. So it's not just about the species, it's about the blood being completely drained. So I give the Greek a lot of credit on that particular thing. But in other places, it really needs a lot of help. And so these two languages, they help each other.
Yes. And there's a whole thing in Mark 7 about that Jesus declared all food clean.
But that's not in the earliest manuscripts, which is another problem.
In brackets.
So,
yeah, it was added. But
and the reason, go ahead.
But I was just going to say, even so, if it were there, if that's exactly what he did, he's talking about dirty hands, because that was the argument that was going on between with the Pharisees. I mean, it wasn't an argument of Jesus, but they were arguing that they were eating with dirty hands, which made food unclean.
Right. And even if he did say he declared all foods clean, what you just said earlier is also a great point, which is to say that everyone there is already eating kosher food. There's not a single pig eater in that group, whether they're Yeshua, his followers, the Pharisees, the rabbis, the teachers who come in. They're all doing the Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14 playbook with regards to what's kosher and what's unkosher. Right. And the other thing is, and this is my point on Mark 7, is that it's not really about kosher food at all. If you read deeply for context, the issue is, if I'm doing all these terrible sinful things, if I'm stealing, if I'm raping, if I'm murdering, eating clean food won't save me, because that's what they were doing. They were trying to derive salvation from the rituals. And Yeshua says, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. Because therefore it is what comes out of a mouth that defiles a man, not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man. So.
Yeah, which goes back to Galatians and Paul. He's like, circumcision doesn't save you. Only Yeshua saves you. It never did.
It wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to set you apart to be obedient.
Yes.
But it was never a salvation requirement. Okay?
Right.
Because this is why Abraham keeps coming up. Like particularly in Romans, like in Romans 10, Abraham's kind of all over there. And the reason is that being 99 years old didn't exempt him from getting the deed done. Okay, that's the point of Abraham. Not that he didn't get circumcised, but that he did. And yes, he took 24 years. So for the extremist Jewish believers who wanted immediate circumcision as a sign that they will be saved, as a salvation issue, Paul said, no, let them study. Let the Holy Spirit call them when they're ready, because if Abraham can take 24 years, so can they. And that was the real argument in Acts 15, not about not getting circumcised at all, but getting circumcised when you are spiritually mature, which is why Timothy also got circumcised and Titus did not. And that's a whole other thing. So,
yeah. Because didn't have a lot to do with who they were ministering to, who they
That's
were being
right.
sent to.
Right.
Okay.
And because,
They're being sent to the
he was
Jews.
half Jewish, and because they were going into heavily Jewish areas, the one thing that would have resolved that was for Timothy to get circumcised, and he was spiritually ready for it, So
Mm-hmm.
that's why Paul did that. But Paul is not a
Yeah.
professional moil. He's not a circumcision rabbi that does that all the time. He made this, probably is the only exception he ever made, circumcising a believer. So
Okay. It's very interesting because there's different books I've read that have talk. One I think of right away is Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, and it's an excellent title because it's exactly what we do.
yeah,
We don't understand the culture, the text, the context, and we don't understand the language and the customs. So we take bits and parts of it and use it to make our own theology out of. And
right.
so Galatians becomes a book where Paul gave up all Judaism and gave up being Jewish. That's what I've heard. Acts becomes like, Paul became converted. Well, Paul was never converted to anything. He stayed a Jewish man. And so we take things so out of context that we form this, what some people call, and I don't want to come across any way disparaging in any way, because I grew up in a Bible believing Sunday morning church. So that was my
Of course.
entire childhood and most of my adult life.
You and millions of others.
Yeah. So it's where I found Jesus. It's where I came to know him. So, but it's becoming more, the word people are using are churchianity. Right. Instead of being Christianity, it's churchianity, because we're indoctrinating people into our own doctrine. And that doctrine is not based in Torah. It's not based in the Old Testament or the New Testament.
Right, exactly.
So,
because when I've dialogued with a lot of Christians over the years, some hostile, some beautiful, it runs the spectrum. What I remind them of is that there was an article about 10 years ago in Christianity Today. So I can't be accused of being biased if I'm quoting from Christianity Today, where one of their ministers, I forget the guy's name, decided he had read Rambam, and Rambam Maimonides had said there are 613 commandments in the first covenant. So he was just curious, wanted to count up how many commandments appeared in the New Testament. And he categorized them the same way that Rambam did. Okay, so he really did his homework. And he found out that in the New Testament, there's 1,038 commandments. So he concluded, and I quote this all the time, if you're not into commandments, the New Testament is not your book, because it's got 400 plus more than are in the Old Testament. So there's no getting around the fact that you got to do stuff. But that what happens is people get caught up in works, Yeah. We don't want to be works based and all this sort of stuff. But the reason they don't understand that works are good is because when they are good, they're called fruits. Because you work to get your fruits, right? You got to do all this effort farming to get your fruits. So yes, when it bears fruit, it's called fruits. Therefore, it's not dead works, and so on.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up something here and share it, because I put these on YouTube, and often people will go to my YouTube channel and watch the whole video. And so for those people, I like to add, if I have something, I'll add it, like a screen, I'll add, and I just want to show you something here that I made.
Okay, go for it.
So is that showing up for you?
Yeah, it's small, but I can read it.
So I should, if I can make it larger, but sorry, let me just.
Right. I love that one in James.
Yes. And
go in peace and be warmed, and you don't give them food for the body. What is the use? Right.
So so What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith and does not have works? Titus, and let our people learn to devote themselves to do good works.
Right.
And not be unfruitful, like you said. Fruit
Right.
and works
Exactly.
go together. Hebrews 6, and for God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you have shown for his name in serving the saints.
This is
Hebrews,
excellent. I love
yeah.
this.
So I went and I wrote down all these verses that had to do with works in a totally positive way. So Romans 2:15, for it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified.
Exactly.
And then I love Revelation 19, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Deeds and works are the same.
I'm glad you brought that one up, because that's a really important thing that speaks to, I think, how the church may not be aware. I'm not saying are not, may not be aware that their future is to marry a Jew. That's assuming they survive.
Yes.
The ones who survive get to marry a Jewish king.
Right.
And when Ruth married Boaz, she didn't stay Moabite. She grafted to Judah's tribe. Mm-hmm. When the church marries Messiah, they will graft to his tribe. And people go, well, would it be like that now? And I'll say, well, what does Hebrews 13:8 say? For Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if he's Jewish then, guess what, guys? He's Jewish now.
So Jewish.
And if he was Torah observant then, which we can definitely prove, then absolutely, of course he's Torah observant now. So what's right and wrong have not changed in 2,000 years.
When Timothy was written, they still only had the Old Testament, but what does Paul say to Timothy? All scripture is God breathed.
Right.
So we have, like, if you say that was all about the Old Testament. It was about the Torah. It was about everything that he has given us. Okay, so we're back to recording. We had a little bit of internet interruption, and so I'm sorry if there's a gap here.
That slide up.
Yes. So, and here's the. So we were talking about these verses, and we had been talking about Revelation 19, 7 through 8, which hopefully you can see on the screen. And we were talking about that the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. And Andrew was talking about that the bride is married to a Jewish man, so a Jewish king. And I think it's interesting because God wanted us to be equally yoked, of course, in our own marriages, but also he had said that he would only marry Israel in a sense. And so when we are grafted in and adopted in, then we are Israel along with those who are native born, who are the tree. The
spiritual Israel doesn't negate biological Israel.
Right.
But the Israel of God is a much bigger tent that we all get to go under. So yes.
So you have the cultivated olive tree compared to the wild olive tree.
Yeah, the wild branches. Yep. Romans 11. And again, what it says is, my people who were anti-Yeshua represent some of those that were broken off, right? Mm-hmm. Because we had been given 700 years advance notice that this was going to happen. And then when it happens, we drop the ball, right? Compounded by the fact that we kept the Torah to ourselves and we didn't teach the nations, which is why you have Jonah go to Nineveh. We forgot that lesson, and so that's why they got broken off. But the bottom line is that Father Yah will always bring back a remnant. And as he said, if he didn't spare the natural branches, he won't spare those that are grafted in either. So don't think that you can rejoice over whatever happened on the Jewish side. You do not support the root. The root supports you, right? And so this is sort of where Jewish people like me who believe in Yeshua come in to be part of that root system to support those who come in who are grafted in through the nations. But it's important to understand that when this was going on, 99% of the people in the world were pagan. It's not like it is now, where roughly half of us believe in one God and half of us don't. A couple billion people on one side, a couple billion people on the other side. What we're seeing is that the Gentiles have to give up their paganism,
right,
and come into Messiah, who will lead them to the Torah, because he is the Torah.
right.
He can't help lead you to himself, and he is the Word made flesh. And of course, the Word made flesh came out of his Father Yahweh's mouth. So this is why Paul keeps saying that Yahweh will be all in all, kol b'chol, all in all for everybody who believes, and Abraham is the father of us all.
Yes.
Not just my people, everybody.
Right.
Because all the nations of the world are blessed through his descendants.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's all biblical. And then I asked you about verse 9, Revelation 19:9. So if you guys have your Bible, I just encourage you to open this. It says, "And the angel said to me, write this, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb." Right. So think about a wedding, but also the groom and the bride. Who does the inviting to a wedding? The bride and groom. Right. So blessed are those who are invited to. So they're guests. They're not the bride. Yeah. And I said this to somebody once, and they got angry, and they said, "You're talking about favoritism, and God doesn't show favoritism." And I said, "It's not favoritism. We're not all the bride. But all throughout our Christian life, we are taught that we are all the bride." Yeah, well, that's not true. First of all, Jews don't marry more than one person. Or at least they shouldn't. Now, granted, back in the day with David, and that was a little loose, but the ideal has always been Adam and Eve, and the fact of the matter is, if your goal as the church, or whatever you want to call yourself, your assembly, your congregation, if your goal is to be married to the Christ, then you're marrying a Jew. He never stopped being Jewish. It's like, I hate that I have to say this, but Jesus was not a Christian. Okay. Right. He's not. Okay. Neither were his followers, by the way. The Christiane was the name of the Gentiles who came later. And there's nothing wrong with being a Gentile coming later. You've got your own title and history, and it's all beautiful and wonderful. But for the Jewish people who started this with Yeshua, who is Jewish, we were called Nazarenes. It's in Acts 24, right? And Paul gets in trouble for being a Nazarene. You are a ringleader of this troublesome sect called the Nazarenes. And what he says in Acts 24 a little later is, "I admit that I worship the Elohim of my fathers, believing everything that is written in the Torah and in the prophets. And I also have a hope for the resurrection of the dead, as do you all also." And I'm paraphrasing, of course. So this is the essential faith on the Jewish side. But the thing is, for a Gentile to become a Christian, they got to stop bowing down to Zeus, or Jupiter, or whatever system they're in. And they have to come in to marry the King of Kings and the Master of Masters. And if the King of Kings and Master of Masters is Jewish, and he never changes, per Hebrews 13:8, same yesterday, today, tomorrow. Right. If you can acknowledge that Jesus was Jewish then, and he doesn't change, then he's obviously Jewish now. He's obviously Torah observant now. So nothing really changed, as we were talking about earlier. And when Ruth marries Boaz, she's not a Moabite anymore. She's part of the tribe of Judah and is in the ancestral lineage of the Messiah, because she is now part of Judah. Exactly. And here's a real fun fact about that. If that was not true about Ruth, then Solomon would be the fourth descendant from half Moabite line. He can't even enter into the temple that he builds. Obviously, that didn't happen. Right. So, church, get ready. Because as whatever wonderful, amazing things you're doing right now,
I'm coming from a place of happiness, love, acceptance, inclusion. I bless you all. But just understand, your big transformation is in front of you. It's not behind you.
Right.
It wasn't when Martin Luther came and put a couple of suggestions on the Bishop of Bitburg's door. If you're going to become the bride of Christ, then you're going to be, and you want to be Christ-like, that's the other one. You want to be like Christ. Well, instead of asking, what would Jesus do? Why don't you ask, what did Yeshua HaMashiach do? And what he did was keep Shabbat, the feasts, all of them, including Purim, and he also kept the dietary laws. So sorry for the shrimp and the hoggies and the piggies and all that stuff. He never ate it.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that we forget, I mean, even John says transgression of the law is sin.
Exactly.
That is the definition of sin, transgressing the law. And I think that it's sad because I know that people are steeped in their traditions.
Right.
And it's tradition over truth. I heard someone say that.
Yeah.
And it's very true. We would rather keep to our traditions than change. And that's exactly what the Pharisees went through. They were not willing to give up in the Bible. These Pharisees from the New Testament were unwilling to give up their traditions of man for the truth of their Messiah standing right in front of them.
And the question is then, who are the Pharisees now?
Yeah.
Who are in the majority now? Who have the levers of power now?
Yeah.
It's certainly not my people. We can barely keep our country intact with Hamas attacking us. So who would it be then?
I know. Yeah. We're going right back to Acts and not in the way of, and I guess more than one way, I'll say it that way, because there is a revelation of God and he is giving his people, whether you're grafted in or not, let's put it that way, revelation of his Torah, his law, his instructions, how to keep these and what it means to him.
Exactly. And the thing is, I'm sandwiched between these two world religions.
I know
one by birth and one by faith. And, so what I will tell people is that I'm an equal opportunity destroyer. I really am. It doesn't matter where you are. There's something that we can be working on and sharing with and growing with together, right? Not me, pounding my fist on high or anything like that. And to show that, I criticize my people, again, for not wanting to teach the nations the Torah. That was our fault. Okay. Right. So it's no wonder that when Christianity goes all around the world and it goes into the Roman Empire, where they, Claudius kicked out the Jews from Rome. It's in Acts 18. What are they going to compare faith in Yeshua to? To the paganism that's there. And then it becomes fossilized. And then it just gets passed down the generations and gets further and further away from the root that gave birth to it in the first place.
Right.
And so it's not really the Christians' fault, per se. But Jeremiah actually predicted this. For my people, the rebuke of us is that we're blind, that we were blind guides. Isaiah 53, that's where we get, like you didn't recognize him, look at what the servant of God had to go through because of your stubbornness and everything. And then for the Gentiles, it's Jeremiah 16, surely we inherited nothing but lies from our fathers in which there is no profit.
Right.
Right. So
I heard someone just talking about that the other day, that verse.
Plenty of blame to go around. Nobody is immune from not catching the full salvation vision and model. Okay. But praise Yahweh that through technology and through works that make these things clear, hopefully, I believe my apostolic writings is one of those works, that we can come together as a unified body, Jew and Gentile, one in Messiah.
Right.
Where we can take our strengths and become better and stronger than we ever could be on our own.
Yes. And I was comparing Acts 2:42 between yours and my ESV, because it says, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers.
Right.
And you have fellowshipping in prayer. And I remember when I read this, because it was a definite article, and I took it to mean that the prayers, they were actually teaching them the Hebrew prayers.
Yes.
This is an example that they're teaching them their own prayers.
Yep. And
for various things.
In Acts 2, also, notice it says they were standing in prayer.
Yes.
Right? Now, you know this, what I'm about to say, I'm 100% convinced that there is one prayer that is called the standing prayer in Judaism. It's called the Amidah. And the Amidah is something that you say at Rosh Hashanah, at Yom Kippur, at Sukkot. You know, it's a very, very sacred prayer that you say to celebrate that you have been sustained and kept alive for another season. And so that's also part of what they're doing in Acts 2. Because remember, you're only 7 weeks out from the resurrection when you're gathering there. And by the way, you're not gathering in an upper room like you were in Acts 1. You're in the temple.
Right. Yeah.
For Shavuot weekend, you know, because of the phrase, all Jews under heaven, that kind of tells you you're in the temple. So a lot of this context gets lost, and it's not necessarily due to a nefarious plot other than that of the enemy who's trying to use people as pawns. But the people themselves, I'm sure they meant very well, but they were simply divorced from the truth and they couldn't get back to it.
Right.
And this also happened to my people. When my people were exiled from the land, the tradition forgot a whole bunch of stuff. They were writing it down 150 years later, and they were guessing.
Yeah.
You know, so we all need Yeshua to come into our hearts to fill in those missing pieces and to complete us all.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, we should probably get off because I know that, or we should stop because we've given so much information and it's been amazing. I love talking with you, and I love talking Bible, scripture, Yeshua, because there's always, he's a living word. So we keep learning and learning and learning, and we will never stop learning.
Yep. And I just want to encourage everybody to check out my website also when you get a chance.
And I'll put that on the show.
OnePeopleMinistries.com. Right. There's a lot of free stuff on there. So, you know, you can enjoy that.
Resources. Yeah. And then there's free resources, and it's very, very well done website. I encourage you to go. One Faith, One People, Ministries.com.
That's it. Yep. And I am so delighted to talk with you, Stephanie. You always make this very easy and a very happy experience. And, you know, I look forward to talking with you again.
Me too. Thank you very much.
Okay. Shalom.
Shalom.